And what made Napoleon like stand out as a general? As a 26-year-old, but also later in life, just in general.
One of the things I mean about Napoleon is that, you read the propaganda about him, the propaganda generated about him, and it makes him look like a Superman, right? It makes him look like,
Mhm.
the most amazing character who ever lived.
Yeah, the cover on your book, he looks like a superhero.
And his own propaganda is extremely good, so it's very effective in making him look heroic. But the one thing where the propaganda really was actually entirely correct is he is a military genius. I mean, there's no question about that. He is somebody who he has a very, very high, high level of pure intelligence. He is personally brave, which actually does matter to keep your cool in the middle of a battle, even if you're a little withdrawn from the fighting. Um, but he has a remarkable capacity to just keep in his head the position of all the different units involved in a battle at any one time. And that is actually incredibly difficult. I mean, you may be commanding, at the beginning of his career as a general, he's commanding tens of thousands of troops. By the end, it will be hundreds of thousands. They're spread out often over several miles on a battlefield. Obviously, they don't have electronic communications. He has runners who come back and forth, giving him reports, but sometimes the runners will get shot, sometimes they won't, they will get lost. Sometimes he will be lucky enough to be able to see the entire battlefield. Sometimes he can't from the position he's in. Often the battlefield is covered in smoke because this is a period when the army uses gunpowder, which generates a huge amount of smoke. Smokeless gunpowder comes in later. It's a technological innovation of the 19th century. So it's very, very tricky to keep all of this in your head, all of this, and to see a way to actually concentrate your key units at just the right moment, at exactly the weak spot in the enemy's lines. This is not easy. This is not easy at all. And he is simply better at it than anybody else. And over the course of his career, he fights, about, probably 30 major battles. And he wins a very, very high percentage of these, probably a much higher percentage than almost any other general of the time. So this is one thing which makes him a great commander. Simply his sheer military intelligence is one. Another is that he really knows how to motivate his soldiers. For him, always, the well-being of his soldiers is top priority, which was not always the case. I mean, in the 18th century, most soldiers in European armies were professional soldiers. They were in it for life. They had a very, very bad reputation. The apocryphal sign over a British pub saying "no dogs, no whores, no soldiers" probably reflects the reality pretty accurately for the way that the population saw most professional soldiers. Then, with the French Revolution, you have suddenly an army of conscripts, a huge army of people who are often, when they come into the army, they have very little training, and the army is really struggling, and the French Revolutionary armies struggled enormously to keep their soldiers fed, to keep them in uniform, to keep them equipped, to give them very basic things like shoes. We don't think about shoes as being so important these days, but of course soldiers marched across Europe on foot. They would wear out their shoes pretty quickly. So shoes were an absolute necessity, otherwise, the soldiers would be marching and developing foot sores very quickly. So particularly they're also carrying often 60, 70 pounds heavy packs on their back. So Napoleon just always made it a priority to give his soldiers the best food that they could find, the best uniforms, and he would do this, if necessary, by stripping the countryside around him, by simply expropriating everything very brutally from the territories he was in. But he would do this. And so he's able to inspire the soldiers. He gives the soldiers rewards. He gives them marks of honor, whether ceremonial swords or medals. He's always there to congratulate people in person. He is very present among his soldiers. He remembers them. He has a great memory. He remembers individuals, and he'll go up and say, "Yes, you were with me at Marengo. Yes, yes, sire. Yes," and so on and so forth. So that is, I think, a second part of it. And then the final thing, I think, which is also very important, is that he is a very good propagandist, because not only is he very good in actually fighting the battles, but he's very good in sort of presenting the battles as great victories. And this, particularly before he comes to power, very important that he convince the authorities back in Paris how brilliant he is and how successful he is, and he does this very, very well. And then, when he's fighting against the masses of the massed forces of Europe, he generates a propaganda that really does quite a lot to demoralize the enemy by presenting him as as being so, absolutely, kind of Superman-like. So I think you put all these things together and you get somebody who's a very, very, very effective general.
Would it be fair to say that Napoleon was a great storyteller?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Again, and this is partly where his training as a writer really came in hand. So he writes a lot, he gives great speeches, he comes up with a lot of memorable lines. Of course, this has always been added to, so a lot of the quotes that are attributed to Napoleon, he didn't actually say, but he did say a lot of them. When he gets to Egypt, he makes an address to his soldiers literally in the shadow of the pyramids, and he says, "Soldiers, 40 centuries are looking down on you." I mean, that's pretty, that's a pretty good line. One of many, many that he knew how to use. He would write bulletins. He was an extremely good storyteller, particularly about himself, his favorite subject.
And also as in painting-wise, right?
Oh, absolutely. So he was absolutely aware of the importance of visual propaganda. So he would have, some of the most remarkable paintings of his period are of him. He was able to sort of seduce and to get cooperation from the greatest French painters of the day, Jacques-Louis David, Antoine Jean Gros, Ingres, many others, to paint him, in heroic poses. The most famous painting of all is the one that shows him, is adorned 1,000,000 brandy bottles. It shows him on a rearing horse in the Alps. I mean, he actually, went across the Alps. This is in 1800. He went across the Alps on a mule, wrapped in a blanket because it was so cold. But, for David, he puts him on this grand horse, in the footsteps of Hannibal. And it's amazingly effective. Of course, a limited number of people would see the paintings themselves, although the really important people in Paris would see the paintings. But then the paintings would be engraved, and copies of them would go out, to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people would see images of Napoleon, if not the actual paintings.